All right. So, mundane astrology is the astrology of nations and world events and world leaders. And so we apply many of the same rules of natal astrology, but we also have a bigger, expanded definition of what the planets do on this world level. First, I want to start with the long cycles of economics and civilization that we have just been shifting out. Now, as you know, time actually can move quickly. We have a sense of it daily, but we also then see the changes in more drawn out and longer period developments. And so the longest cycle that has just closed was the last triple conjunction of the planets Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto, all in the sign of Capricorn. And that cycle was in 1894 BCE. And this was the time of the establishment of ancient Babylon. We saw from there a more flourishing of civilization. Within 100 years, there was the Code of Hammurabi, whose basic tenet is an eye for an eye. We might think of that as the law of retribution. What you do to one person, you have done back to you. And the new cycle that initiated in January of 2020 was again Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto meeting up around 22 to 24 degrees of the sign of Capricorn. Now, Capricorn is ruled by the planet Saturn and has to do with order and structure. And Saturn is the planet of discipline and laws. And in our internal makeup, it's how we internalize the laws of living peacefully, cohabitating with family, friends, and community. So Jupiter is the planet that gives us a broader perspective of life, and also is more the expansive, higher qualities of higher mind and philosophy and religion. So Jupiter's generally associated with legal processes and religious thinking, where Saturn is about boundary lines and drawing the structure of how things are done, the routine and what's acceptable. And Pluto is the longer cycle, Pluto having to do with the process of a personal level, deep personal transformation. On a national or a global level, we see it as how the balance of power rises and falls. So in the more recent cycle conjunctions in January and throughout the year of 2020, we saw this be things that had to do with our health, our sense of security, Saturn. Jupiter is the social side, the expansion, and Jupiter and Pluto are common. They have a 14-year cycle to come together. They're commonly associated with health issues, and particularly of the masses. And so Saturn was taking control with Pluto, because this was a very high level dynamic of society taking control. a lockdown of the global society, and in a sense, creating a pandemic mass psychosis that affected us in very deep ways. And also in this, it is the seed period of the emergence of the superhuman. Now, over that time that we were all locked down and disassociated from our friends and family, many people turned in very creative ways. And so we can see over and over, there are stories of really good things coming out of the process, because humanity is in a surge for growth and expansion. And when there are situations in nature that cause things to be destroyed or held back, take, for instance, the wildfires in California, then the forests regrow. New life, the volcano here in Hawaii, new life already growing on that lava that was so destructive that, turned people's lives upside down in many ways. So in these cycles, we see the buildup. We have, like I said, the long cycle. Then we have the smaller units that are, you could say, pulses within the longer dynamic. So Jupiter has a cycle of 12 years to go around the zodiac. And Jupiter is a good marker in our lives for our periods of personal development and expansion. And Saturn, most people think of the Saturn return, or they hear about the Saturn return, which is a marker of adult growth and responsibility. And Saturn has a cycle of 28 to 30 years. The two of them meet up in the same sign every 20 years. And this is marking generations. And we see in that 20-year period, notable developments of business and economics and social life. And the period, those patterns of the 20-year conjunctions follow meeting in the same sign or in the same element, this triplicity. There are three signs of each of the four elements. And so these 20-year periods follow a pattern of being in the same element for a period of 240 years. And then we have a mutation and a moving into the next element. And so this 2020, December of 2020, Saturn and Jupiter had a conjunction at 0 degrees of the sign of Aquarius. And Aquarius is an air sign. And the old cycle of 240 years was in Earth. And Earth was all about currencies, boundaries, imperialism, the things that have to do with top-down government. And so air is a sign or an element that incorporates humanity. It's the human signs, Gemini, the sign of the mind and thinking and communication. Libra, the sign of justice and balance, harmony and relationships. And Aquarius, the sign that has to do with brotherhood, humanity, with higher developments of society growing stronger and better. We don't evolve backwards, really. So we're looking at big processes in development. And it was in the Arab period of around 700 and after that they discovered that the outer planets, Jupiter and Saturn, were linked with big changes in religions and dynasties. And so they judged it to be nearly 1,000 years. So the cycle is actually 960 years, sorry. And when the element changes back to 0 degrees Aries, that's one whole cycle. Then Pluto is the planet of power and evolution. And it has a 248-year cycle. And this is the topic of current time, where Pluto has completed its cycle and coming back at least to the United States chart. And the first contact was February 20th. And on February 24th, Putin started the Ukraine conflict, which has led up to a greater buildup of NATO and a lot of saber rattling. The second contact, being retrograde, was July 11th. And 2 weeks after that, Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, had an independent visit to Taiwan, and ultimately her focus was making a deal with the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing, who have built a new plant in Phoenix, Arizona. And within a week or so of coming back to the States, Biden passed the chip bill, a bill giving billions of dollars to the semiconductor manufacturers, because they feel that that is going to be the key thing that moves us forward as a technological country. And the third time of Pluto's return will be on December 28th. And so we still have that to be discovered. But this is after the next election. And we saw that things became pretty unstable after the last election. Okay, here is the chart of the United States. And this chart is called the Sibley chart because there are about 50 different calculations based on different people's research. But the Sibley chart was really established in people's minds as having strength representing our country because of the 2001 September 11th event, where at that time Pluto was exactly at 12 degrees of Sagittarius, which is the rising degree of this US chart. So it couldn't have been more like very, dynamic. And so I've highlighted or circled Pluto at 27 Capricorn. In the US chart, it's sitting in the house of finances. This is the treasury. And Pluto is the type of power that is the top power. It doesn't, it instills and assumes its own powers more than it has to do with elected or assigned power. And Pluto in the US chart is directly across from the planet Mercury, which is about communication. It's the media. What are we telling the people? And this is Jupiter. In fact, we have Venus first, then Jupiter, and then the sun all clustered together. And this is really the highlight, I think, of the US chart, where we have that sense of compassion, religion, a brighter purpose. We want to be the leaders from the high level, and it's in the sign of Cancer. So home and family have been the roots of American society. And Jupiter is also the planet of expansion. And so it didn't really hold us back from being an imperialist country. This is Mars in the sign of Gemini, where it's traveling currently. And the moon is in the sign of Aquarius. This is really positive in terms of a statement about Americans being highly independent, humanitarian for most respects, and the moon having to do with the way that we established a democratic government. So Saturn, this is Saturn here at the top, and it's in this house area that has to do with the government overall, how laws are set in motion and who actually has the power. And it is in the sign of Libra, ruled by Venus. So mostly it holds to the idea of the checks and balances of the way that our government was established. So we have the three parts of government that are somewhat operating independent, but also without only autonomous power. And so Mars is here currently is at 19 degrees today. And the planet Saturn is down in Aquarius at 19 degrees. So this new moon is a pretty positive time, at least in terms, I would think, of moving ahead and the type of things that we'll see to influence people one way or another towards the next election, both in the types of decisions that are done by the government in this next time period, and also the campaigning. And there's always a lot of things we just don't know what's happening in the background. So this is our US chart. Okay, so back to the idea of that previous established triple conjunction in Capricorn. I found this quote online in researching this, and the topic said, at this time, the ancient city of Babylon was established by Sumu Abum, an Amorite king. The city was small and insignificant, but within a few short generations, it grew. By the sixth dynasty, less than 100 years later, the king Hammurabi codified a series of simple rules and regulations inspired by Shamash, the sun god, by adopting previously existing edicts into the new socio-economic realities. These regulations, inspired by divinity, were etched in stone and have influenced all modern law to this day. And this is essentially the idea of eye for an eye. And so you can see here the topic of socioeconomic realities, and that's exactly where we are today in this impact of this triple conjunction of 2020. We had the beginning of the COVID experience with a global lockdown. This is also the close of the long paradigm of the top-down power structures that enslave the most to serve the few. It could also give, it could still take another couple of generations to fully witness the emergence into the human evolution of the Aquarian age. But this is the crisis of the fourth turning, which refers to phases of life of empires. And this is the beginning of the concluding act. And we had a greater impact through 2020, where we had 7 eclipses. Generally, we will see 4, but 7 is unusual. And also, there were 7 major conjunctions of Saturn, Pluto, 3 with Jupiter, Pluto, and Mars conjuncting the others, and Saturn, Jupiter, Neptune, sorry. So here's a simple graphic that kind of defines the flow of development from beginning to the end of the empire. And this type of process can be shown over other time periods as well. But this shows us that since 2000 to 2001, this last period has been a collapse. And 2021 to 2023 is our turning point. And then I want to point out that once there's a conclusion, there is a rebirth. And so what we begin to see, even in the beginning, about the springtime of 2023, there's already a shift as we're moving into opening cycles. We've been in closing phases. Now we're moving into opening phases. And this is outburst. This is growth. Yeah. Okay. This graph is called the Barbault Planetary Index. And this is based on the how many degrees away the planets are in as they are counted in pairs, like Pluto, Neptune, Pluto, Uranus, and coming down through the into the shorter cycles and summing that up. So when this graph shows upward movement, we have growth, advancement, harmony among nations. And when we have these troughs, this is some period of pulling back, difficulties. This was around 2011, between around 2011 into 2015, we had the Uranus-Pluto squares that we saw mostly in the Middle East uproar, the Arab Spring, for instance, and that type of public uprising. Then things get a little better. Well, here we are. We've had a big drop since 2015, and this is the bottom of the trough, the closest the planets are going to get. And this is 2022 and 2023. So you can see, yeah, we're at the bottom and things are difficult. And now this is also a period of dramatic change. It goes up very quickly. And through the rest of this century, we don't have the kind of fall of the pattern at all in this century. And the only thing we can compare to in the past is my next slide. This is for the cycle that included the fall of the Roman Empire. And again, we had this, things were high. This was a very decadent period for the empire. And then there was too much spread, too much corruption. The empire was too big. And then there was not the general support of the people who were more wealthy, didn't want to support the government. And so essentially, this is a period that we can compare to. This was literally the fall of the Roman Empire, and it took a long time for things to climb back to the level of civilization. In fact, we went into the Dark Ages after 500, through 500 to almost 1,000. So here we are in emerging cycles. Pluto's return brings us to look at what was happening with our our ancestors beginning this country. And it took the militia, it took the people knowing that they had to defend themselves to make this change and separate from the government of England. So people banded together. And this is the beginning of our shared history of democracy and also the empowerment of the individual. The Saturn-Jupiter conjunctions moving into the air element for the next 240 years also puts us into the mind of the expansion of the individual and literally a new way of training our minds and our spirits. So the air element is also about the stories that we tell, the way that we remember and educate from our history. Then we had a Jupiter-Neptune conjunction in the sign of Pisces this past April 12th. And the last time that pattern happened, Jupiter and Neptune do conjunct every 14 years, but in each different sign. And the pattern comes back around to ending in Pisces, and it's a 156-year cycle. Also, in August 2nd, we had Mars make a conjunction with Uranus, and also Uranus is with the North Node, which is a little bit longer connection. The nodes have to do with the spiritual level, with the dynamic that's guiding the social period. And we've been having the North Node in the sign of Taurus, which is about the our values, and Taurus rules the throat chakra. And you might think about what it is that we take into our body. So food, in the things that we ingest, the things that we take in and understand. And Uranus is the planet of new ideas, the forward thinking, the advancement of energies. And Mars and Uranus really speak to the action and independence of the individual. Mars rules the sign of Aries, and that's me, myself, and I. Aries is the individual, and coming from that personal view and sense of, self and doing in the world. Mars is the planet of action, and also the drive and movement of how we want things to be. When we have our dreams and desires, Mars is the action to go after it and to make things happen. And this Mars-Uranus North Node conjunction in the sign of Taurus also is a 155-year cycle. Coming up, the next thing is we've had Jupiter this year pass into the sign of Aries, which, as I said, is the sign of the self, of independence, of starting new things, of breaking out of old patterns. The shift from Pisces into Aries is a little, well, let's compare that. I get the image of trying to pull myself out of the waves at Kahena Beach. This is a small beach near my home. Haven't been there for years, but it has a big pull when the wave comes out, because it drops down there a bit. So the struggle out of the water, out of too much impact of things that are confusing, that take away focus, coming out into independence, feel yourself, get your center. And Aries is like, okay, where do we go now? And it's like the sun in springtime bursting forth, and that new energy for new life. So we have Jupiter finishing its little trip back into Pisces at the end of this month and through the month of November. And then in December, or at the end of November, Jupiter enters Aries again. And Aries is the world point. So things that happen around 0 degrees Aries also affect the broader collective of the planet. So I feel like as we go into this, well, I'm going ahead of myself a little bit, but yeah, this month of October has a number of changes. We have been in a period of 7 retrograde planets, and that's a lot. That's some of the outer planets we don't often notice because they do kind of, their patterns fit in with business cycles. And so we get periods of things moving along quickly, and then we have a stall, we have review. And usually the retrograde periods are a natural, well, they are a natural part of every cycle, but they are useful. They help us fix our mistakes before we get too far ahead of ourselves. So as we go into 2023, we have Saturn moving into the sign of Pisces. This should be very interesting because Saturn rules both Capricorn, which Capricorn is like things in stone, solid, structural. And then Aquarius, where Saturn has been this year and will finish out a little bit into next year through the retrogrades. Saturn in Aquarius is more about the intellectual thinking. And this has been our period where so many of the details of what we didn't know earlier in this cycle phase, like say the last 2 years, a lot of truth is coming out. Things are becoming clear on what is our path of going forward. And the Jupiter movement goes through Aries pretty quickly, and then by May joins up, or I'm sorry, goes into the sign of Taurus. It will still take another year until the spring of 2024, when Jupiter and Uranus conjunct. This is an exciting cycle. In fact, Jupiter and Uranus conjunctions are associated with aviation developments. It was a feature of the Wright brothers' first flight. So Jupiter and Uranus are exciting in terms of the ideas of advancement, of broadening our perspective on things, and Uranus having to do with anything technical, our technology and advancement, and even perhaps our space flight. We finally start to get off the ground. It could be a really exciting period. And Saturn and Neptune further on in 2026 at 0 degrees Aries on February 20th. This is something really to look forward to, because Saturn is, well, the last time, well, the time that comes to mind was the 60s. Saturn in Pisces in opposition to Pluto and Uranus in 1967, 68. This was the summer of love. This was the advancement of personal freedom and independence. And a lot of things became more spiritual. The influx of Eastern religion coming into America was very strong during this period of Saturn in Pisces. So with the planet Neptune, it could become a very visionary world. So some of the more close to home coming around just ahead of us, we have the eclipses, the solar eclipse at 2 degrees Scorpio on October 25th. And this happens to be a trine aspect to Venus, and Venus rules the midheaven. So I feel like this is saying that there's that the administration isn't too upset by this midterm election, that more of the attention goes to the budget, to finances, and these eclipses have effect to both the president's chart. The eclipse will be in opposition to Biden's moon, and this could be a health crisis. It is in his 6th house of acute health. And also then sort of going along is the conjunction to Vice President Harris's Mercury, which rules her ascendant, which is Gemini. And she'll also be having Mars over that ascendant and her north node, and repeated not only here before the election, she has contact, then also that final transit finishes in the early part of March. The total lunar eclipse is at 15 degrees of Taurus on election day. And this is the final set of eclipses in the combination of Taurus and Scorpio. And so we see this time as an assessment of values and restructuring the debt and currency issues. So the focus tends to be in this next at least 3-month period. 3 to 6 months is the focus on spending versus debt. And that could be true for our personal lives as well. The midterm election, I think, will maintain the Democrat administration, but with some shift in the congressional dynamics. And the pattern that repeats in the spring will bring out some of the challenges that push the government to move more to support the people. That eclipse in here is the chart for the eclipse around the US chart. Sorry for my uneven lines, but I wanted to point out that the sun of this eclipse is in a harmonious trine to the sun of the US chart. And this is in a financial house. This is the house that had to do with our debt and currency issues with other countries. So there could be some easing up agreements and such. The sun is the sun and Mercury and Venus are all clustered here in Scorpio with the South Node. And the South Node is powerful in terms of sometimes having to let go or to make changes, to not be in as much a commanding position as acknowledging or letting go. So we might have some easing up of some of the sanctions and tensions. We have a direct opposition in this eclipse with the moon conjunct Uranus. And this is in the sign of Taurus. Taurus is ruled by Venus, and Venus is not in a good condition in this chart. Part of the topic, I think, and this is also the house area that has to do with children. So women's issues, childbearing, abortion issues, these are hot topics, and they're not going to go away. I put a big red cross across this chart because this includes Saturn here at the bottom of the chart, very near, and will soon pass over the US position of the moon, and the moon rules the people in general. So in this combination, I feel like we're on the edge of some big demonstrations and shifts that have to happen in labor, in education, in how we deal with the question of women's reproduction. And we have a big green dynamic yod. This angle is called a quincunx or an inconjunct. And these signs involved, Gemini to Capricorn or Gemini to Scorpio, have nothing in common by element or quality. So these lines represent aspects of tension that call for some type of renegotiation, thinking over, finding a resolution where there seems to be no middle ground. So this is a very dynamic structure, and the base of it has a sextile. So there is a potential for a resolution. And we have Pluto to Mars and the Sun, Mercury, and we can include Venus to Mars. So Mars in the US chart has been our method of peacekeeping. And I think this is some situation that we're, it looks like we're very much on the verge of war, but I'm wondering if, because of the instability in our government, we might not be as aggressive as we may have been in past situations. So we have to kind of watch what happens with Mars passing over. It has 3 contacts to its natal place, and so the Mars cycle finishes here in the first week of March. We have to maybe consider that there's a lot of discussion that has to go on. This area of the chart has to do with Congress, and and so I think there's the high tension, but it doesn't have a real big trigger yet. So something to watch. I think we get through this election period with, I don't think we'll see as much question about the election process, but there is some overturn happening in Congress. So I think there's a movement to get more people in Congress that have a focus on helping the people, on reviving the economy, on reducing debt. And I think we'll start to see a turnaround through these next 2 years. And we have a very interesting election in 2024. So that's down the road. Oh, here's my Mars dates. The first contact of Mars to its own place is October 5th, the second, November 25th, and the third is March 8th. It's finished it turns direct on January 12th, and it's out of its shadow by March 14th. So that means since August, we've had a long period of Mars dragging slowly through the most of the sign of Gemini. And so it slowed down our mail. It's made a lot of transportation issues. When it goes retrograde, perhaps that gives us time to work out some new solutions. And by March, it finally moves into the sign of Cancer on the 26th of March 2023. Within the same time frame, Pluto enters Aquarius. And in 1776 into 1777, Pluto moved into Aquarius in only 18 months. We've had Pluto hanging out at this end of Capricorn for 2 years. So it may be a real relief as Pluto moves into Aquarius. Again, I think this leans into the development of a higher level of society. And Saturn enters Pisces on March 8th. So you see, our springtime has a lot of flavors of new energy, planets changing signs in a way that is more humane, more compassionate, more focused on appreciation of what we have. And maybe we see less of that dynamic consumerism. I think the consumerism certainly feeds the globalist, and what we see all over the planet now is people coming back to their roots. The way the people in the Netherlands are meeting the government's controls over farming is they've gone to the farmers for their produce and cutting out buying things in the stores. So collective community markets are becoming more the way to address the food issue. I think that's true for Hawaii too. It's easy here. Let's see. Okay, here's my last slide. So this quote from Spontaneous Evolution, is that showing up backwards? Yeah, great book by Bruce Lipton and Steve Bowerman. Steve Bowerman is Swami Beyond Ananda. He says, imagine going to the polling places and being able to vote for the greater of two goods. Thanks to the internet's ability to connect with global village, these conversations on how to progress and what do we choose to conserve are already underway. Politics, indeed, on the cusp of achieving its highest purpose to promote and sustain a healthy humanity on a wealthy planet where every cellular soul thrives. All that is needed now is the willingness of critical mass of humanity to participate in changing our story. And how do we do that? Meditate. Okay.
Standing ovation.